Welcome to MMA on the Rocks. My name is Bill Welker. You are listening to episode 147 of the podcast. Today is Sunday, July the 7th, and we are coming off of a huge UFC pay-per-view weekend, UFC 239 from the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. But before we get to that, first things first, let me introduce back from a deadly cough, back from the depths of Atlantic City and into your ear holes, all the way from New Jersey, Jeff, the Animal Wilson. Jeff, how you feeling on this Sunday afternoon, my friend? Welcome back.
Bill, I'm phenomenal. I'm glad to be back. Thanks to the Manimal for filling in last week. And Bill, the USA women's soccer team just won the Women's World Cup for the second tournament in a row. I'm really excited. Glad to be back on the show. I missed you, Bill. I missed talking about some MMA, and we had plenty last night to talk about.
Yeah, man. We've even had a little bit of radio silence. We haven't been texting as much as usual in your absence here. I think just to build the tension of your comeback. The fans have been clamoring. They want more Animal. But definitely a shout out to the Manimal who stepped up last week to fill in the shoes of the Animal. Of course, I'm talking about John the Manimal Beneducci from the MMA and Beyond podcast. So definitely appreciate him stepping up last week. Let's jump right into it, Jeff. Man, what a fucking crazy pay-per-view. I mean, it was one of those shows. It was kind of like up and down. The early prelims were nuts. We had some great finishes, and then the ESPN prelims kind of, tapered off a little bit, and then the pay-per-view got off to a little bit of a slow start, and then it just got fucking shot out of a cannon after that for the rest of the night. So let's start at the top here. I mean, you could take your pick of where we could start, but since everything has a story and requires a little bit of analysis here and a little bit of a breakdown, let's just start at the top, work our way down. Jon Jones defends his light heavyweight championship against Thiago Santos, who, leading up to this week, I feel like was pretty much written off. Aside from the few people who always appear every time Jon Jones fights and picks the other guy and says, tries to give some example as to why he should win. And pretty much exactly what I was talking about last week, outside of a puncher's chance and catching Jones in a state where he was taking the fight lightly. And I think there may have been some evidence of that. I mean, he didn't look to be in the greatest shape we've ever seen him. But outside of that, didn't really seem like there was a chance for Thiago Santos here outside of landing a big shot, which, he definitely tried. And I've said for a long time, Jeff, especially here on this show, a patient Thiago Santos is one of the scariest and most dangerous men walking the face of this earth. I stand by that statement. I think he had a good game plan, but when you fight for 5 rounds with your back up against the cage, it doesn't matter if you have a couple of quick bursts and a couple of quick explosions and even hurt the champ a little bit. It's not going to be enough to take the belt off his waist. One judge seemed to think that Thiago Santos did enough. I definitely disagree with that. I saw Jones handily winning this fight. He took the first round off as he often does, just trying to get a beat and get his opponent's rhythm. And then, throughout the fight, Thiago hurt both of his legs basically, but was still dangerous, which is why Jones wisely did not jump on any opportunities that Santos seemed hurt. And, he played it smart in there. Yeah, he fought a smart fight. That's one thing you have to admit about Jon Jones. He has a really high IQ. He knows how to stay out of trouble. He got clipped a couple of times, but, compared to what we've seen those couple of clips do to other people from Thiago Santos, Jones really wore it well, in my opinion. How did you see this main event going down, Jeff?
Bill, I really thought Thiago Santos went in there with a really good game plan, attacking John Jones' legs from the beginning. And then somewhere in the second round, it looked like Thiago Santos hurt something in one of his knees. And he was having a hard time moving around after that. Still, did what he could on one leg. You got to give him credit for that. He's a tough guy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really wanted Thiago Santos to win this fight. I'm a really big fan of his. I'd like to see him as a light heavyweight champion, but unfortunately, Bill, he just didn't do enough to get it done last night. I don't think I don't see why the one judge had it for Thiago Santos. I had it 3 rounds for Jones, definitely 2, 3, and 4. Maybe 2 was a toss up because in the beginning Santos wasn't looking too bad, but ultimately I gave that one to Jones. Maybe the 5th round you give to Santos too because he's been a lot more aggressive. But at that point he was going for broke.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a close fight. I thought it was probably even closer than the first John Jones and Gustafsson fight.
Hmm.
We've talked about that on the show in the past. A lot of people thought Gustafsson won, but going back and really dissecting that one, I thought it was probably a 4-1 victory for John Jones in that one. So I thought this one was maybe a little bit closer. Look, at the end of the day, there's 2 reasons. If you're clamoring for Thiago Santos, and saying that he won this fight, there can only be 2 reasons. One, you took him as that plus 1100 underdog and you laid a lot of money on it, which is not a terrible bet because that's where he opened. I believe he closed at a plus 350.
Oh,
So for those who don't gamble a lot, if you bet $100 on Thiago Santos when the line first opened, you could potentially win $1,100. But if too many people start placing that bet, then the line has to draw closer to breaking even because that's just how the casinos make their money. They have to cover their losses and stuff. They can't just give everybody those odds,
hmm.
especially as it gets closer to the fight. So it opened at plus 1100, it closed at plus 350. So you could still bet $100, and if Thiago Santos won, you would win $350. So that's the first reason you thought that Thiago Santos won that fight. And the second reason, if you're still really adamant that Thiago Santos won that fight, it's because you don't like John Jones as a person. That's just the way it is. You weren't watching this fight objectively. If this fight were boxing and it were a challenger against a champion in boxing, they would not have even given Thiago Santos that first round, which, he won because John Jones, like I said, was getting his rhythm
Yep.
and he took the round off. But Thiago didn't really do much in that first round either. It was a fairly uneventful round. But again, if this were boxing, John Jones would have won this 50-45. And that's just the way it goes. You have to beat the champ to become the champ. It has to be convincing. Like you've got to beat the fuck out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And Santos didn't do that at all. He had a couple of moments here where he had John rocked. He had him in some trouble. John even fell on the ground a couple of times, which we're not used to seeing. I think it might have been, one of the only times we've seen him on his back. Gustafsson took him down, which he got back up. And then, he had that that incident. And I think it was in the 3rd round. He went for a flying knee and then he wound up head over heels, but popped right back up. But yeah, nothing outside of a couple of explosive moments for Thiago Santos in this fight. Neither of these guys could walk at the end of this, which, they both left it all on the line. So if you're going to talk about the toughness of Thiago Santos, you have to talk about the toughness of John Jones as well, because he took a lot of hard leg kicks from Santos, who, despite being wobbly on those legs, he was still throwing them fucking hard at John. I mean, he was leaving everything out there. He put it all on the line. And John Jones took everything he had to throw at him. And so you really have to admire the toughness of both of these guys. And that's the problem too. You can't make it a one-sided thing. You can't say, well, Thiago is tougher. Thiago did more damage and go on and on. That all that tells me when you have that kind of opinion is that you don't like John Jones as a person, which is fine. I can totally understand that. I'm not the biggest fan of him as a person either, but as a fighter, you still have to look at the fight for what it was. And it was a victory for John Jones. And I don't think there's much of an argument there. It's definitely close. But yeah, and if the decision had gone to Santos, we've seen much worse decisions. But there were 2 rounds of this fight where he could barely stand on his feet. Yeah. So that's that. I'm not sure what's next. I don't see a rematch happening just because Dana White pretty much already shot it down. Something that was in the works would have been Luke Rockhold against John Jones, but that was thwarted earlier in the night by Jan Blachowicz. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but anything else on this main event here, Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think John Jones, while I'm not his biggest fan as a person, as a fighter, I think he's a genius, man. He was very, very weary of Thiago Santos' power, and that's why you didn't see him try to swarm, because that's whenever Jones would get too close, Santos would just start throwing wild, and Jones very intelligently just backed away. He knew the type of fight he needed to fight against Thiago Santos, and that was just to win points, stay away from his power. And he did all that very effectively. And like you said, dude, Jones's lead leg was busted up at the end of probably the first 2 rounds. And for him to be able to continue just as well, he's a really tough dude. So I think this was an awesome fight. Probably not as exciting as some of the knockouts we saw earlier on in the card, but a very, very, really good technical display from both of these guys. I really hope Santos gets a rematch someday. I don't think it'll happen anytime soon. As good as his performance was on one leg, I don't think it merits an immediate rematch. I think he's got to build his way back up again. Probably take some time off and recover. Because Joe Rogan was saying he might have torn an ACL. I don't know about all that. I'm not an expert on that, but I would like Santos to take some time, recover, and then see him back in there when he's at 100%.
Yeah, I would think maybe a rematch with Anthony Smith would be a good thing for Thiago Santos. Those two, of course, have fought at middleweight. Anthony Smith coming off that submission victory of Alexander Gustafsson, and you definitely can't put Anthony Smith back in there with John Jones because he was just completely dominated for 5 rounds. But I think that would be a good fight in the interim. In the meantime, we've got a lot of tough young guys coming up in this division from the Contender Series. And, you got Johnny Walker, you got Jan Blachowicz. We've got a pretty strong division here compared to a couple of years ago. And then you can't rule out Daniel Cormier because maybe Jones will be convinced to move up if Cormier beats Stipe, but he wants to fight at 205 if they do the trilogy. So, maybe that'll happen depending how Cormier feels coming out of the fight with Stipe. So, there's a lot of possibilities here. It's good to see John Jones active again. I think he said he wants to fight twice more before the year's over. But we'll see how that goes. We'll see how his recovery is. Yeah, Santos was definitely beating up those legs, those tiny legs of John Jones. It's kind of funny. That's the other reason it was kind of apparent that Jones maybe wasn't in the best shape because his legs looked even smaller. He's always had like small legs, and he's even talked about it in the past. It's just, genetically how it turned out. He's not built. He's not built like a defensive end like his brothers.
Who are both defensive ends.
Yeah,
in the NFL.
and very good ones too, from what I understand. Yeah, so we'll see what's next for these guys. But yeah, that was a war. So credit to the toughness of both of these guys. It was a nail biter of a fight. It's not the kind of fight I would want to go back and watch again. But it was good for what it was. Let's move on to the co-main event here. And man, what can you say about Amanda Nunes except she's the best female fighter to ever walk the face of the earth? There's no other way you could put it. She's beaten every other woman who has ever been a champion in the bantamweight and featherweight divisions. As young as that featherweight division is, she's beaten everybody. And you could tell in that first round, she was throwing a lot of feints. She was trying to get her range. And you could tell she was looking to throw some big power from that right side, from her strong side. I thought it was going to be an overhand, but it wound up being a kick that put Holly Holm down. from the first angle, it kind of looked like Holly was okay. She landed on her butt and she immediately started scooting back and looked like, she was getting up defensively. And then Nunes hit her with 2 shots right behind the ear that came straight down like a fucking boulder falling out of the sky. And again, from that first angle, it looked like she might have been okay, but then they showed the behind angle where she stumbled and Mark Goddard had to help her up. And even then, she was stumbling when she was on her feet. Definitely a good stoppage there. At first, I was like, oh, it's Mark Goddard. He's just stopping the fight because it went to the ground. But no, Holly Holm was out. And, it was a good stoppage. And, man, what a win for Amanda Nunes. What a story. You just can't say enough good things about her. She's just a phenomenal fighter. She's the best to ever do it, in my book, and I think in a lot of people's books. Give me your thoughts on this co-main event, Jeff.
Dude, agree with you 100%. Like you said, the first camera angle, all I saw was Holly Holm get up and Mark Goddard kind of hug her. I thought it was a bad stoppage at first. Then they did the reverse angle, and you see Holly Holm just unable to stand. Like a newborn giraffe.
Yeah, she was on the Bambi legs.
Yeah, dude. But what can you say about Amanda Nunes, man? I thought Holly Holm was looking good at the start of that because Nunes went for a very nice judo throw, leg trip kind of thing, and Holly Holm did a great job of using the whizzer to keep Nunes from jumping on top of her. Got up really quick, and I was thinking, okay, we're okay here. I think this will probably go 5 rounds, and then Nunes kind of fakes out Holly Holm because Holm lifts her leg to kind of check a leg kick. And it was, I didn't understand why she did that until I saw the replay where Nunes took like a half step with her lead leg and then switched it up and lands that head kick, which Holly Holm uses a lot to finish people. Mm-hmm. So I was really, really impressed with that. And I mean, what can you say about Amanda Nunes here? She's beaten essentially the female titans of MMA, beaten Ronda, Miesha Tate, now Holly Holm, all the former bantamweight champions, and KO'd Cyborg, like we've never seen before for the featherweight championship, and now she wants to defend that featherweight championship. So, Bill, I mean, what do you do here? It feels like Amanda Nunes has cleaned out both of her divisions here. So, what do you see next for her?
Yeah, well, what she said she wants to do is defend her featherweight title. So first of all, she's the first double champ in UFC history, male or female, to win a belt, move up, win another belt, and then return to her original weight class and defend that belt. So that's a huge accomplishment in itself. Conor McGregor, of course, was the first to do it. He was the featherweight champion. He moved up to lightweight, but he stayed there. He never went back to defend his featherweight championship. He had to be stripped of that. Same with Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier stayed at heavyweight and he had to be stripped of his light heavyweight title. Henry Cejudo still has both. He has the opportunity to defend back at his original weight class of flyweight, but he hasn't done that yet, and he's going to be on the shelf for a little bit with the shoulder injury and his fractured ankle, everything else he's got going on. So credit to Amanda Nunes for being such a pioneer. Of course, the first openly gay champion in MMA history. So that's awesome for her. She's a great ambassador for that community. She's a great ambassador for women in general, and just a great fighter, and we've just seen, I think, the surface of what she's capable of because, we saw her outstrike a striker last night, and she's also a black belt Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So who's out there who can stop her? My opinion, possibly Valentina Shevchenko in a third fight. That's something I would like to see. We saw the first time they fought, it was a 3-round fight, and we saw Amanda Nunes gas in that third round, and Valentina won the third round. If that had been a 5-round fight, maybe Valentina could have won it. In their second fight, I thought Valentina won. When the decision came around, she did not. The decision went to Amanda Nunes. It was a very close fight, but it was a very competitive fight. And Valentina is the only one who I think has really shown Amanda Nunes any problems since she's been on this championship run. So maybe the flyweight champion moving up, but Outside of that, I don't really see a challenge for her right now. But this is something we've thought many times in the past before. We thought for a long time that there was nobody who could challenge Ronda Rousey, and then Holly Holm comes out of nowhere, and then it's kind of been a whirlwind in women's MMA ever since. But this is a great time for women's MMA, and a lot of that is due to the champ, the Lioness, Amanda Nunes. Anything else on this co-main event, Jeff?
Yeah, Bill, I got to disagree with you. I think there's one woman out there who can beat Amanda Nunes because she's already beaten Amanda Nunes. Her name is Kat Zingano, Bill.
Oh, geez.
I think we need to run that one back now. I think it's the perfect time. Kat Zingano, she wants to move up to featherweight too. She's already beaten Nunes. I think that Nunes herself wants to get that one back. And I say, let's do it, man. I feel like both women's divisions right now, bantamweight and featherweight, are in a little bit of a toss up. So I say let's mix it up and just throw Kat Zingano in there. I don't even care what weight class. Make it both weight classes. Have them fight at 135 and then 145. I just think that's the fight to make at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you could be right, and they could throw her in there. The problems I see with this theory, Jeff, is that Kat has lost 4 of her last 5. Of course, she's coming off that unfortunate TKO loss to Megan Anderson, where she got the toe in the eye. It was 5 years ago that she beat Amanda Nunes before she went on this epic championship run. But you're right, she does have a victory over her, nonetheless. It is a fight that could potentially come together, and it would make sense. There's a backstory there. It would be kind of similar to Michael Bisping defending his belt against Dan Henderson, just because there was a grudge. And even though Dan Henderson was ranked like 14th or whatever at the time, they were able to put it together, I guess. Yeah, that would make sense. So valid point there, Jeff. I guess if you're going to be a nitpicker like I'm being, it wouldn't make sense, but I think it would be a fun little grudge match. All right. Wow. So here was the shock of the night, in my opinion. Not a shock that Jorge Masvidal beat Ben Askren, because I say time and time again, Jorge Masvidal is a guy you can never count out against anybody. I said that before the Darren Till fight. I said that last week in regards to his fight with Ben Askren, but this fight was so astronomical for so many reasons, because you had some awkward kind of trash talk in there. I don't feel like Ben Askren ever really gets offensive with his trash talk, but Jorge Masvidal is just a guy you don't do it with, because he gets mad and then stuff like this happens. And this fight was so impactful because here you have Ben Askren undefeated, and he does this corny boom roasted videos and like his dad bod baby shark music videos, and he's like very cocky, very arrogant, like, I'm gonna be fighting for the title, I'm gonna pass Colby Covington for his title, and he's talking all this stuff about all great things he's gonna do, and he's on such a high horse, and they get knocked off of it in 5 seconds and almost put into a coma. I mean, this is one of the most vicious flying knee knockouts in the history of the UFC, breaking the record for the fastest knockout in UFC history. And it probably could have been even faster if Herb Dean had gotten in there. Jason Herzog had gotten in there right after the knee landed, because those 2 punches that Askren took on the ground were just insult to injury. So Jorge Masvidal comes out with his hands behind his back, runs in a crescent moon shape to his right, and then cuts back into a Ben Askren who's bending over for a takedown, and just connects with a flying right knee to the right side of Ben's face. And it was just perfectly timed. He grabbed a hold of Ben's shoulder as he was falling down so he wouldn't roll too far away, so he could follow up with more punches before Jason Herzog could get in there. And man, the rest is history. Give me your reaction to this fight, Jeff.
Bill, Jorge Masvidal is someone I would never want to piss off after seeing that. Jesus, man. I mean, what do you do to someone who can do that to you? I mean, um, eh, I'm just left speechless, dude. Like, I saw it happen, and it took my brain like 15 minutes to process what had happened. Like you said, Masvidal just breaks into a full-on sprint, like you said, in a curve, and then runs right back at Ben Askren. And as he's coming down, just hits him with a knee that I thought had like cracked his skull. I don't know how Ben Askren is alive right now, dude.
Mhm.
Um, just absolute madness. I mean, um, you know, dude, I don't even know what to say about this. Bill, do you think we give Masvidal a title shot here? What do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see anything else that makes sense. If Kamaru Usman is healthy, um, maybe before awarding him the title shot, we see what happens with the Colby Covington Robbie Lawler fight. But
Mm,
um, I don't see either of those two getting out of that fight injury free. I think that's going to be a really tough fight. Despite what a lot of people think, a lot of people writing off Colby Covington right away, which I don't know how you can do because the guy is cringeworthy. He's annoying. He's obnoxious, but he can fucking fight. And people seem to forget that every time Colby Covington's name comes up. Um, but yeah, depending what happens there, I think you can definitely throw Usman. And, Usman was in attendance and he was saying he doesn't want this work. And, talking about Masvidal. So I think that's an interesting fight. We could potentially see the fight that we were hoping to see with Askren, where, you know, will his takedown defense be enough? Um, eh, or will he be able to finish the fight on the feet before we have to find out, which is what happened with Ben Askren. But man, this sets Ben Askren way back. A lot of people calling for him to retire. That's ridiculous. This is still a guy who has accomplished so much in MMA, and if you don't like him as a person, then that's fine. But you can't. It's the same thing with Colby Covington. You can't take away what the guy has accomplished in mixed martial arts, which is incredible. To win 19 fights in a row without even really coming close to a loss, except in that Robbie Lawler fight, he was in a little bit of trouble. But um, to take away everything that this guy has accomplished in a 5-second loss and saying that he needs to walk away from MMA is absurd. There's definitely a lot of fights out there for Ben Askren. He needs to take some time off. He's 34, 35 years old. First knockout loss of his life. He's going to need to take at least 6 months off to recover from this one. He's going to have to be quiet for a little bit. The trash talk will definitely have to simmer down, and who knows if he'll even be the same fighter after this. I mean, that was a brutally vicious knockout, but if he wants to hang around, then there's definitely a place for him in the UFC. I think he definitely still belongs here. There's no question about that. Yeah, man, it's crazy how far he fell. A lot of people, mixed reactions with Jorge Masvidal after the fight. Getting in Ben Askren's unconscious face and yelling at him, and then mocking him and laying on the ground, and then talking shit in the press conference. It should be when a fight is over, it's over. But then his response to that was, this guy's allowed to say whatever he wants leading up to the fight. But once it's over, I'm not allowed to say anything else. Like, why does it have to work like that? And I guess that makes sense. I'm a fan of sportsmanship. At the end of the day, I like to see, if you beat a guy, you shake his hand and walk away. If you lose to a guy, you shake his hand and walk away. And you leave it at that. But, I definitely understand his argument. Any thoughts on the post-fight antics, Jeff?
Yeah, Bill, I wasn't a fan of that. I felt like there was no need for that. Masvidal already won. Um, and I put that in parentheses and I underline that because he won in a major way.
Mhm.
I feel like a win like that kind of squashes the beef. You know what I mean? I felt like it was definitive. Um, But yeah, aside from that, I don't think Masvidal loses any stock here. Like I said, I could do without all the post fight stuff, but he's Masvidal is a great fighter. I can't wait to see where he lands in this title picture here. And as for Ben Askren, like you said, I agree. I think he needs a while to recover. Even after he was moving around and stuff, at no point was he like able to move on his own. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? After the fight, super glassy eyed. You could tell once he was standing up, he was still really out of it. But I'm curious to see how Ben Askren bounces back. He's a tough dude. You don't get to 19-0 for nothing. And he's won a title belt in every organization he's fought in. So, I don't think Ben Askren loses too much stock here. Obviously, does it look bad? Yes. But I feel like there's an opportunity for him to bounce back, reassess some things, add some things to his game. So I'm curious to see how he's going to bounce back from this. Um, but yeah, Bill, that's not the last knockout of the night that we're going to talk about, is it? I mean,
No, it's definitely not. And I'll tell you something, Jeff. I think Luke Rockhold had a worse night than Ben Askren because Ben Askren's knockout was more devastating, and yeah, he was put out completely unconscious, whereas Rockhold wasn't. But you got to remember, Rockhold took a lot of damage in the first round of this fight, where
yep.
he was almost knocked out with a head kick at the end of it. I mean, he went down and sat down on a stool that wasn't there in his corner. uh, uh, so he was out of it, and then came out in the second round and got knocked out, got his jaw broken, actually. So I think he definitely took a lot more damage than Askren did. Yeah, Askren got his lights put out with one shot, and he got him put out hard, but you got to think about the accumulative damage that Luke Rockhold took last night. And this is kind of, you know, kind of what I was predicting with this fight, because Rockhold is a guy who hangs those hands so low, and Blachowicz is a guy who throws straight punches, and that's just a bad combination. He's a big, strong dude, and Rockhold was saying, "I'm going to bring so much more power to this 205-pound division." Yeah, that's probably true, but you're also in there with guys who are bringing a lot more power than the guys you've been fighting,
Mm.
and your chin's already been tenderized in the last couple of years. Because if you look at Luke Rockhold's resume in the last couple of years, he had a really tough fight with Chris Weidman where he won the title. Then he gets knocked out unconscious by Bisping. Then he almost gets knocked out in the first round against David Branch. He winds up, you know, submitting him with punches in the second round of that fight. But then that brutal knockout loss to Yoel Romero, that was in February last year. He did the smart thing. He took a long time off, almost a year and a half. And, but now broken jaw. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what happens to Luke Rockhold from here. I mean, if he wins this fight, he's probably fighting John Jones next, because there's such a great storyline there. He wants to avenge his teammate DC and everything like that. But man, he looks past Jan Blachowicz, and there was something else going on with Luke Rockhold. They said he had some staph infections leading up to this camp, and after that first round, man, he just looked winded. I don't know if he put on too much weight to move up, or if that staph infection was getting to him, but you could tell like he was fighting with some urgency in that first round, and seemed to blow all his energy, which is not something we're used to seeing from Luke Rockhold. But give me your thoughts on this fight, Jeff, and the win from Blachowicz.
Yeah, dude. Something was definitely different about Rockhold, and I agree with you. I think he wasn't used to carrying around the extra weight, going up to 205. He looked good physically, but dude, you could tell when he was hanging on Jan Blachowicz in the first round, it wasn't working. We've talked about Blachowicz and how good he is in the clinch, and Luke Rockhold, was getting into the clinch with him, and it it looked like there was a disparity in strength here. I think Luke Rockhold underestimated how strong some of these light heavyweights are, and like you said, they're bringing a lot more power than the guys he's used to fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in that second round, just Jan Blachowicz, it was all him. Like you said, he almost got knocked out in the first round, right at the bell. is when Jan Blachowicz threw that head kick, and I guess Luke Rockhold just wasn't there. I don't know if it was the jump in weight. 20 pounds is a lot. Something was definitely up, but I think you're right. I think his chin has been softened up, especially after that knockout by Yoel Romero. That was really bad, and to see him with a broken jaw and stuff, I think you're right. I think it was a worse night for Luke Rockhold than Ben Askren. Ben Askren, while he did get KO'd in 5 seconds, that's only one shot he had to take. Whereas Luke Rockhold, like you said, he took a lot of shots, took a lot of damage. But Bill, what do you do with Luke Rockhold at this point? Do you think he maybe hangs up the gloves? Does he just take a long break again? What does he do here?
It's hard to say, man. I mean, he took a year and a half off after that last knockout, which is the right thing to do. I mean, who knows what he's doing in the gym in the meantime? If he's ever getting knocked out in the gym, that kind of resets the clock again. Dana White was calling for him to retire and hang it up. It's in his last 4 fights, it's 3 knockouts and 1 almost knockout. So that's never a good thing. You never want to see a guy go down like that, especially a guy like Luke Rockhold, who seemed like he was going to be like the unbeatable force that Anderson Silva was at middleweight, after he beat Chris Weidman and everything like that. If he does decide to come back in like a year's time, you do have Chris Weidman moving up to 205. So depending on what happens with him in that division, you've got that grudge match down the line. That's a potential for Luke Rockhold. I think a lot of people would be interested in that. I don't see him working up to a title shot anytime soon to challenge John Jones. If John Jones is still the champion a couple years down the line, I mean, he doesn't need to fight, I'm sure. I mean, the guy was modeling for Ralph Lauren a couple of weeks ago. He could definitely go on to other things as long as they don't involve talking, because he's fucking terrible at that.
That is definitely true.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage a lot of these guys to start, a radio show or doing broadcasting. I would not encourage Luke Rockhold to do that. He's just, talking is not a gift that he has. He was gifted with some fucking studly good looks and, the ability to beat some ass, but, not to talk about either of those things or anything else. So in any case, I don't want to overshadow Jan Blachowicz either, because this is a huge victory for him, huge feather in his cap. I definitely knew he had the potential to do this to Luke Rockhold. I said that on the show last week. Those straight punches of Blachowicz and the way Luke Rockhold holds his hands. I mean, granted, it was a shot breaking out of the clinch, but if Rockhold were in the habit of having his hands up, maybe they would have been there to at least, dampen the blow a little bit. But man, Blachowicz looks good. He was calling for a title shot, but he's coming off that TKO loss to Thiago Santos. Before that, he was on a hell of a run, taking out top names in the division. Maybe Blachowicz and Anthony Smith is what we do next. That would be a fun fight. That's probably what's going to happen. If he beats Anthony Smith, I say, yeah, give him a title shot. Because why not? But he's not a pay-per-view draw. John Jones is not a pay-per-view draw. There wasn't even a lot of buzz about John Jones fighting this week. I think there was more buzz about like Askren and Masvidal, to be honest. And that's always been the case with John Jones. The only time he has sold a lot of pay-per-views is when he fought Daniel Cormier in those grudge matches. So Jan Blachowicz is not going to get people to download the ESPN Plus app and pay for that monthly and then order the pay-per-view within that thing if they could figure out how to do that. So yeah, there's all that. All right, let's move on here. Michael Chiesa just smothers Diego Sanchez for 3 rounds. I mean, he just was a giant hairy quilt on top of Diego Sanchez. He looks so much bigger. And Diego Sanchez, I was saying this last night, here's a guy who has fought at middleweight before. Hard to believe because he looks so much smaller than Chiesa, who has fought at 155. And I know Rogan talked about it a little too much last night, but how the fuck did this guy ever make lightweight? But he looked good. I think it's going to be tough for him in this division because if you look at the top of the division, it's a lot of guys that he's going to have a hard time getting to the ground. Tyron Woodley, he's not going to be able to take Tyron Woodley down the way he did with Thiago Sanchez. Towards the end of this fight, he wasn't even changing his level for takedowns. He was just kind of lowering his head and knocking Diego over and then climbing on top of him. You're not doing that to Tyron Woodley. You're not doing that to Kobe Covington. You're not doing that to Rafael dos Anjos. You're not doing that to Robbie Lawler. I go on and on. But he did look good, not to take anything away from him. Diego Sanchez has been on a hot streak lately. He had like a yoga instructor in his corner, and that was it. He had no MMA people. Diego Sanchez, that is. So, that's kind of concerning. But I guess 30 fights in the UFC, he didn't feel like he needed anybody. He left Jackson Wink a couple of weeks ago. A lot of drama coming out of that camp lately. But give me your thoughts on Michael Chiesa's performance, Jeff.
Not to take anything away from Chiesa, but I feel like that camp switch, this late on in camp, this close to the fight, probably affected Diego Sanchez a little bit. But not to take anything away from Chiesa here, dude dominated. At no point did he look like he was in trouble. Didn't look like he was losing any aspect of this fight. And like you said, was just able to ragdoll Diego Sanchez. Whenever Chiesa wanted, he took Diego Sanchez down. My only concern here, Bill, is and this is not to take anything away from Diego Sanchez because he's got a very good grappling game. Chiesa couldn't finish Sanchez on the ground, despite spending a lot of time on top of him on the ground. He was going for a lot of things, and Sanchez, had answers for all of them. And I agree with you on this, Bill. I think that Chiesa is going to have a hard time with some of these guys at the top. He's not going to be able to take them down. They're all pretty well-rounded. All those guys you mentioned, Tyron Woodley, RDA, Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman, they can all strike as well. They're all really well-rounded. So I think Chiesa is going to have a hard time as we get closer to the top of this division. And I think that Chiesa is probably one of those guys who would benefit from a 165-pound division. I think he's I think he's going to have a hard time at welterweight as we get closer to the top. And he's just too damn big for 155, man. I don't know how he made it, man.
Yeah, for sure. That's baffling. Chiesa looked good. I mean, as far as not finishing Diego Sanchez has never been submitted in MMA. He's just one of those guys that's just very underrated as a grappler. You're not going to see him submit a ton of people either because he just doesn't prefer to do that. But from what I understand, in the gym, he gives black belts fits all the time, and actually has a pretty solid leg lock game from the rumors I've heard. In any case, let's. I want to speed things up a little bit here, Jeff. So I'm going to give you a couple of things, and then you tell me what stands out to you. The young guy, Arnold Allen, extends his winning streak in the UFC, taking out Gilbert Melendez, who has now lost 5 in a row. Unfortunate to see from Gilbert Melendez, who is a legend, has been in some epic wars, including his fight with Diego Sanchez, which was just fucking nuts. And one of the craziest fights ever. But it's tough to see Gilbert Melendez still getting in there when he definitely doesn't have to against these young guys. But Arnold Allen looked good. Outpointed Gilbert Melendez in this fight. Got the unanimous decision. Marlon Vera takes the last minute opponent, Noeline Hernandez, and Hernandez gave a rose to one of the ring girls at the weigh-ins, and that's probably all he's going to be remembered for. Marlon Chito Vera getting the rear naked choke victory. He was supposed to fight Sean O'Malley. Of course, that didn't come together because of O'Malley's USADA issues. And Claudia Gadelha looked pretty good. Kept things standing with Randa Marcos. This was a very uneventful fight where they just kind of circled each other like an old-timey boxing fight, and landed a couple of punches. It wasn't quite like Derek Lewis and Francis Ngannou, but it did have, it was reminiscent of that a little bit. And then let's see, Song Yadong getting a knockout victory over Alejandro Perez. And I'm gonna stop it there with those four. Jeff, give me what's
I can't not mention this. This fight was ridiculous. Song Yadong, just a young cat coming up. We've talked about him before on the show. We've talked about how skilled he is on the feet, and he's got really good hand speed. He's fast. He can cut his angles really quick, and he was just way too much for Alejandro Perez. But we've talked about Song before. One of his first fights. And I'm excited, man. I'm excited to see what comes up next for him. I feel like he's probably going to be one of these guys this week coming up that's going to have a number next to his name. I think he's going to be up there on the rankings, and I'm excited to see what's next for him in this bantamweight division. He's shaking it up, like we said, super fast hands. I believe his last fight was a finish as well. So I'm excited for this dude, man.
Yeah. I think he's definitely got a lot of potential. It's awesome to see another strong fighter coming out of China, because that's a market that the UFC is definitely trying to build up. And yeah, man, he looked fucking vicious last night. Another guy who looked really vicious on the early prelims, Edmund Shabazian. This is a fight I told you guys last week, if you were going to check out one early prelim, to check out Shabazian versus Jack Marshman, and he just fucking mauled Jack Marshman in 72 seconds or something like that. Shabazian, really a boxer, but showing off his well-roundedness at 21 years old, just mauled Marshman, beat him up from inside his guard, and then took his back and choked him out in the first couple of minutes of the fight here. Just a really dominant, impressive performance from Edmund Shabazian, who looks really lean for a middleweight. A lot of people calling for a ranked opponent next for Shabazian. I hope they kind of pump the brakes with him a little bit. The kid looked phenomenal, but he is 21. You don't want to see him peaking too early and then falling off here. But did you catch the Shabazian Marshman fight, Jeff?
Unfortunately, Bill, I did not, but I'm definitely going to go back and watch that one. So, Bill, before we go on, I just want to make a note of this. So, no Fight of the Night award last night, but there were 4 Performance of the Night's awards going for all of our knockout artists last night. Amanda Nunes, Jorge Masvidal, Jan Blachowicz, and the boy, Song Yadong. So super exciting fight, man. What'd you think of this card overall? I thought the UFC hit it out of the park here.
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough coming off a card like last week, which was like a sleeper card that really overproduced. So many phenomenal fights happened last week, and then you have this one and you get that for free, and then this week you have a pay-per-view where you got to pay for it. And like I said, it started off like really strong, and then it kind of lulled a little bit with the Claudia Gadelha fight on TV. Even Joe Rogan was like, this isn't the kind of fight you want to see on ESPN, which, he probably shouldn't be saying. He should probably be endorsing his product a little bit more, but we all know Rogan doesn't give a fuck. And then, starting off the pay-per-view with Chiesa and Sanchez, probably not the strongest. Most people aren't going to be a fan of the way the John Jones and Santos fight went. But other than that, you had a lot of fireworks in between. So overall, I thought this was a really entertaining card. I thought it was, it was worth a pay-per-view, and, it was a good fight. Chance for counter, getting a win over Ismail Nordiev, who's coming in with a lot of hype. And then Julia Vila with the win over Pani Kianzad, Ultimate Fighter alumni, and that's how we round out this card. But yeah, overall, I thought it was great. Any other thoughts on UFC 239, Jeff?
No, I think we can call it a wrap on UFC 239. But Bill, before we discuss next week's card, or this card coming up on Saturday, Bill, you made me a promise. You told me that it was Scotch month. So what do you got for me today, Bill? It's the first Sunday of July.
Yeah, man. So July will be Scotch month. I'm gonna try and keep up with this, because I was called out on my knowledge of Scotch, and I gotta step up to the plate here, Jeff. I'm a man who takes my knowledge of booze seriously. So A couple of things we need to understand when we talk about scotch, a couple of terms that are going to come up. Like one of them is single malt. A lot of people put a lot of prestige behind the term single malt. And what does that really mean? It means that the whiskey was made in one distillery as opposed to a blended scotch where they take, um, some malts that were combined from different distilleries. So does it necessarily mean quality? No, it doesn't. A lot of people think like if it's not single malt, it's crap. Um, I think there's an art to making blended scotches, but a lot of the most coveted scotches are single malt. Another term you'll see coming up is peated, and what that means is smoky. So a lot of people think all scotch is supposed to be smoky. It's not. A lot of scotch could be like very sweet, almost like a dessert. A lot of people like to drink scotch after dinner, and that's one of the ones I happen to be drinking right now, Jeff. This is a Glenlivet 18-year-old scotch. This is a very coveted scotch for it's a good one for beginning scotch drinkers who are looking to become connoisseurs. You can see the color of it, Jeff. It's almost like your urine when you first wake up in the morning, like that.
Yeah, it's only because I haven't drank water, Bill.
Well, yeah, you can't do that in your sleep unless you have an IV in your arm. But yeah, it's got like an appley sweetness to it, like apple and brown sugar. Glenlivet, solid. Very very basic. Good place to start. If you want to get into scotches, it is a single malt. Um, but yeah, it's like an apple crisp kind of like very full, very rich, very sweet taste to it. And I was talking about the peatiness, Jeff. So um what they
So
have
who's Pete, Bill?
Peat, Jeff. So peat is like a grass with like decomposing vegetation in it and stuff. It's almost like hay or like straw,
Hmm.
and it's found in like the boggy areas of Scotland. And what they do is they take the peat and they set it on fire and they use the smoke from the peat to dry out the malt, because you have to start the distillation process with a dry malt. And so this is like barley or whatever grain they're using to make the scotch. And then what happens is because you're using the fire from the peat, it like a smoky flavor gets into the the barley or the grain, whatever grain you're using to make your whiskey. So like a Lagavulin, Jeff, this is a highly peaty scotch.
Hmm.
It's got that real smoky, real bold flavor. Um, it's got a little bit of like the brown sugary sweetness to it, but sometimes the peatiness becomes overpowering. And a lot of people who consider themselves scotch enthusiasts will say that peat maybe tastes like burning rubber, or actually one that I heard recently was like boiled band-aids, which I thought was kind of funny. Uh, this was actually the person who inspired Scotch Month saying this. But what it is, in like the other way to do it is to just let hot air dry out the malt, or dry out the barley, and that could take a really long time. Obviously, it's a lot faster to just set something on fire and get that smoky flavor infused to it. And in like the Highland area of Scotland, it's like really rainy and really really wet, really damp. So you don't have like that hot air. Um, to dry out the malt and to dry out the barley. So what you could do is like ship it to an area where it is hot and have it dry out there. But when they first started making Scotch whiskeys, they didn't have like the transportation methods in order to send the barley back and forth. So they figured out if they just set the peat on fire, it dries it out quicker and it makes it taste really nice and smoky. So there's a big divide in the Scotch community, Scotch drinkers. Like, should scotch have peat in it or should it not? And I mean, if you go according to history, it should, because that's how it started out. It was only like, down the line a little bit, they figured out that they could just let it air dry and it takes a little bit longer. And then that becomes a more coveted, more rich, more sweet scotch. And usually more expensive than the peatier ones as well. But If you ask me, I like them both, Jeff. I'm a big fan of single malts that have been air dried, and I'm a big fan of single malts and blended that have been dried with the peat smoke. There's, you know, it depends what your palate is. If you like really sweet, really rich, really full flavor, then you're gonna like the air dried. If you like a smoky flavor, then you're gonna like the peat. So again, Glenlivet, this is a pretty standard. So this is a good starting point. So if you're listening to the show and you're not really into Scotch, this is not one of the smoky ones. This is more of the sweet, like an apple pie, like an apple crisp, an apple brown Betty, if you will. Really rich flavor to it. So order one of those after dinner one night and give it a shot. I want to hear from you guys though. So this is going to be a fully immersive event, this Scotch month. I want to hear what you guys drink out there as well, because I'm looking for recommendations. I want to try some new stuff. I'm going to give you guys some of my all-time favorite Scotches. I know Jeff has one for sure that we're going to get to. It was featured on the podcast last year, the Lagavulin, which is one of those controversial peaty scotches that I think is delicious. One of my all-time favorites. So that'll be one of the weeks of Scotch month, but starting out with the Glenlivet. So let me know what you think about that. Let me know what you think about the description of the scotches, and I could get into a little bit more detail about it, but I just had to come out and flex a little bit, Jeff. Flex a little bit of the Scotch knowledge. I know my booze, and I don't appreciate people telling me otherwise. So, what are your thoughts, Jeff? Have I convinced you? You want to go out and grab a Scotch right now, or we still got some work to do?
Oh, Bill, I'm on board for it. I'm actually I've been looking for something to sip on over the summer. I got some time off from work.
Mm-hmm.
So I might have to I'm like you said, like I told you before, more of a beer dude. So um I think I'm gonna jump on this Scotch wagon here and delve a little bit deeper into um something that's a little different from whiskey and stuff like that. So might have to look for some Glenlivet. So Bill, which one would you recommend? Because just like typing it into Google here, I'm finding the 12-year pop up a lot.
Yeah, the 12-year. So that's going to be a really common one that you'll find, and there's a big difference between the 12 and the 18 because they're aged in different types of wood. So I think the 18 is aged in American oak, which is going to bring a little bit more sweetness forward. And the 12, I actually have a bottle of 12 here also. Let's see. It doesn't say right on the front what it's aged in. But yeah, so the 12 is going to be a little on the lighter side. So it's not going to be as full, as rich, as sweet. But it's still a nice Scotch. It's a nice sipper. And the price point is definitely a lot lower as well for the 12-year. And it's still a really nice sip. It doesn't have that smokiness of a peated Scotch because it is still an air-dried single malt. But yeah, so there's that. But we could talk about it in more detail down the line. We'll pick you out something, Jeff, that you can break down for the people. But let's talk about UFC Fight Night 155. And at first glance, I wasn't thrilled with this card. There was only like one fight that was jumping out to me, but now I'm seeing a couple of others as well because I'm looking down. Like I'm looking at Sherdog, and they always kind of like mix these up. So in any case, this is in the Golden One Center in Sacramento, California. The headliner is not going to get anybody to tune in. It's Aspen Ladd and Germaine De Randamie. If Germaine De Randamie wins against Aspen Ladd, I don't know what you do with her because you can't put her in there with Amanda Nunes again. You just can't. Especially after running away from that 145-pound title, you can't put her in there for a title shot. I just don't see it happening. But I also don't see a way for Germaine De Randamie to stop the takedown and the punishment of Aspen Ladd. This is a pretty quick turnaround for her. But I don't know. Maybe you could change my mind, Jeff, or maybe you're in the same boat. What do you feel about this main event?
Yeah, but I don't think I'm changing your mind. Aspen Ladd, been on a tear lately, and Germaine De Randamie hasn't fought since what's it been like 2 years,
Let me see.
something like that. Well, don't quote me on that, but De Randamie hasn't fought in a while.
November will be a year, actually. So it's November 2018 was her last fight against Raquel Pennington.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, so De Randamie hasn't fought in a while. I think Aspen Ladd, I think the ground game is going to be too much for De Randamie. She's a very big striker, but if Aspen Ladd can find a way to get really close to De Randamie, find a way past the clinch a little bit and just take it to the ground, I think it's all Aspen Ladd.
Mm-hmm.
So Bill, the only fights, to me, this is looking a little bit, and we talked about this before the show. It looks like it's a little bit hard to get into, but looking at some of these fights, there's some I definitely want to watch. So I definitely want to see Uriah Faber coming out of retirement. He's going to be fighting Ricky Simone. Josh Emmett versus Mirsad Bektic looks really good. Beneil Dariush versus Drakkar Klose. I think that one's going to be really good as well.
Mm-hmm.
Cesar Mutante Ferreira is fighting against Marvin Vettori at middleweight. That fight looks pretty good to me. And in the prelims, we have Darren Elkins fighting Ryan Hall. I think that will be really good. And someone who hasn't fought in a really long time, Bill, the winner of the first Women's Ultimate Fighter series, Juliana Pena, is going to be fighting former flyweight women's champion Nico Montano at 135. I think that one's going to be a really good fight as well. What do you think, Bill? Anything that I just mentioned wetting your palate a little bit here?
Yeah, so the Ryan Hall, Darren Elkins is really an interesting fight for me. It's a crazy matchup because Darren Elkins is like the Terminator, like impossible to put away, and Ryan Hall has been putting away everybody. It's going to be tough to use like an Imanari roll and get in on Darren Elkins' legs, a wrestler like that. But Ryan Hall could definitely do it. I think that's a really intriguing matchup. The Josh Emmett Mirsad Bektic fight, I think, is going to be fucking nuts. These are two bangers, guys that like to get in there and just slug it out. Josh Emmett, real big power puncher. It'll be interesting to see him, opening up for Uriah Faber. I don't know, man. I saw Uriah Faber last night in somebody's corner, and he was looking every bit of 40 years old. He was looking like kind of pale and drawn out for him. I don't know why he's doing this, man. He went out on a high note. He's got a real entrepreneurial brain. He's got some businesses. He's got his gym. He's got so much going on for himself. Why does he want to get in there and fight a fucking killer like Ricky Simone? Even if he beats him, like what's it gonna do? I kind of got it when TJ was the champ, and he could come in and maybe win a fight and then have that grudge match with TJ, but that's kind of off the table. I just don't see the reason why he would do this, but at the end of the day, he's a competitor and he wants to do it. So here we go, man. I think Ricky Simone is a real dangerous fight for anybody. Especially somebody who's been sitting on the shelf retired, and credit to Uriah Faber. Like he never took himself out of the USADA pool. So I guess he was never really officially retired. Kept getting drug tested all this time. So, yeah. And then Beneil Dariush, Drakkar Klose. That's going to be a fun fight. And Carl Roberson is fighting on this card. He's from the Contender Series. He's a real explosive striker. He's fighting some guy named Wellington Turman, who sounds like a fake name. Sounds like a like a
a pseudonym.
It reminds me of you remember that movie Bad Santa? The kid was Thurman Merman. It reminds me of Thurman Merman. We got Jan Blachowicz on this card too, and Mike Rodriguez. So John Vellante is a guy, every time he fights, like maybe he's going to use his wrestling credentials this time. And then nope, he's like, I need to slug it out. So, I mean, you got to respect that. It hasn't been the best for his career, but it's definitely entertaining. And then the Andre Fili Shaman Moraes fight is a lot of fun. So this is you know what? I was disappointed with this card just because the main event is shit. But now that we've been talking through it, I'm kind of excited for a lot of the middle of this. So
yeah, I think if we just change the headliner, maybe I'd be more excited. But the build up to that is phenomenal. Like we said, Uriah Faber, the Josh Emmett fight, Dariush versus Jakar Close, that'll be really good. Cesar Ferreira, he's a monster at middleweight. I'm really excited to see him fight. I could do without Nico Montano, but I do like Juliana Pena.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see her get back in there. Like you said, Darren Elkins versus Ryan Hall. I'm really curious to see if Ryan Hall can keep up with Darren Elkins, because Darren Elkins is just going to pressure him.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if he's going to be able to get off that heel hook garbage he goes for.
Yeah, it's possible. And then you mentioned Mutante. He's fighting Marvin, the Italian Dream Vittori, who in his last fight, which was over a year ago, he took the current interim champ Israel Adesanya to a split decision. So legit competitor there. That's a fun fight. But yeah, we got a lot of fun things going on in this card. I think it'll be a good time. So have some drinks and enjoy it. I think, man, we went kind of long this week, Jeff. We haven't done this in so long that we just go on and on. There was a lot going on though. But anything else you want to get off your chest?
Now I'm just excited to try out some new scotches. I'm back for a while, Bill. Got some time to myself in the summer, so I'm ready to rock and roll. I feel like some of the cards coming up, they had some reveals for the main events last week. So the next card coming up the next pay-per-view in July is going to be awesome. The one in August is really good. We got DC versus Stipe coming up. The boy Frankie Edgar, I feel like he's the spirit of New Jersey embodied into a person, Bill.
Yeah.
Fighting Max Holloway. So, Bill, we got a lot of fun stuff coming up. A lot of good content.
Yeah, man. Lots of fun stuff to talk about. So even if the card next week sucks, we'll have some scotch and, we'll talk about what's on the horizon for the UFC and elsewhere. All right. So if you guys want to get a hold of Jeff and give him some scotch recommendations, please do so at @animal_Wilson on Twitter and on Instagram. Don't forget, the Animal is now on Instagram, so go give him a follow on there. And you guys know how to get a hold of me. It's at MMA on the Rocks everywhere on social media. You go to our website, MMAonTheRocks.com, which is where, by the way, I just wrote a blog about my brewery tour in Asheville, North Carolina. I talked about my top 5 favorite breweries that I loved in Asheville. I do still plan on doing a one-off podcast that will break down all those breweries for anybody who enjoys traveling and enjoys going to breweries like I do and like my family does. I do want to put that podcast out for you guys, but if you've been waiting on that, then you can get a preview of it with the blog I just posted, top 5 breweries in the Asheville, North Carolina area. It is an absolute mecca for craft beer. And I'm planning on making this a series where I rate and review breweries for you guys based on a criteria that I've come up with over many months and many beers. So it may not make a lot of sense, but it's there for you to enjoy. So reach out to us on social media. Let us know what you guys are thinking and drinking. And that's all we got for this week. Until next time. Cheers, everybody. Goodbye.